also very keenly aware of the mandatory minimum sentencing laws in the state of Oregon that require no ifs, ands, or buts about it, that absolutely require a mandatory 10-year sentence day for day for DUI manslaughter. And I've got two of them. So I know that at 24 years old, as I literally drive past my parents' block, and I look down that street one more time, I know that I'm not going to see this neighborhood for about 20 years. So that was the absolute worst day of many people's lives. If somebody had done this to my loved one, my family member, I would not want them to simply go to prison for 17 and a half years and get out and go on with their life as though this never happened. I would absolutely hope they would learn everything they could about their addiction and where they went wrong so that they could then get out and try to warn others to not follow in their footsteps. That is how you repay society, right? Merely going to prison is not paying a debt. In order to repay a debt, you have to add something of value to make up for what you took. Me doing the work that I do today and every day and doing it continually and faithfully, that's me making deposits toward this debt that I owe society because I took two amazing human beings from society who were doing great work. So the least that I can do is try to follow in their footsteps and add some value to society. And so that is why I do what I do.
Let's start off with, what is your name?
My name is Martin Lockett.
What is addiction?
Addiction is a disease. A lot of people struggle with identifying addiction that way, but I'll simply say that it has an onset like a disease. It is progressive if it doesn't get treated like a disease, and it can kill you if not treated like a disease.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. Tell your story in any way you want to share it.
So to provide some context, background information, I grew up in Portland, Oregon in the 80s. And if anybody's familiar with that area today, let me just say it was vastly different back then. There were gangs coming up from California fighting for territory. It was the height of the crack epidemic. There were turf wars. It was a war zone. There was drive-by shootings on a regular basis. However, I had the great fortune of growing up with two very loving, nurturing parents, a twin brother, two older sisters. And I think my parents did everything they could to shield us from the chaos of our environment because they had us enrolled in everything from Little League to wrestling to Cub Scouts, you name it. We were very, very active. My dad, he was not an emotional man per se, not by any stretch, but he was very active. So he was our assistant coach for Little League, and he would attend our Cub Scout meetings and help us build the little derby cars that we would go and race at the events and things like that. And so we never felt that our needs were not being met. We were a very close-knit family, although we didn't have as much as some other kids. We were very much loved and taken care of. And things didn't take a turn for me until I got to high school. So I was a very shy kid, and anybody who would be willing to have me and accept me, I was willing to do anything for that acceptance. And so this led to me taking my first drink of alcohol at the age of 14. I remember my brother and I had gone to a party. We were hanging out with a guy who was 1 year older than we were. And this guy was notoriously popular in the school. He was a gang member. All the guys feared him. All the girls loved him. And we were able to hang out with him because he was actually a friend of the family. And so he had taken us to this party. I remember he handed my brother and me a couple beers, and he goes off into the crowd to talk to some people. And we're sitting there looking at each other with these beers, and we're thinking, there's no way we can drink these because mom and dad would absolutely kill us. However, we also knew that if we were going to be accepted, we had to drink. So I remember I took a few swigs off of that disgusting liquid, and I remember my chest heated up, right, almost instantly. And there was just all my inhibitions just seemed to come down in one fell swoop. And I could finally freely talk to girls without fumbling over my words. And I could kind of loosen up and mingle with people and not break out in a cold sweat. And I'm thinking, this is incredible. Like this is it. This is what I've been waiting to be this Martin for so many years. And so that was my initial encounter with alcohol, and that was my infatuation with alcohol. And so things stayed pretty steadily for the next couple years. I drank socially, just hanging out with the guys. Around age 16, things took a darker turn with my relationship with alcohol because now I'm thinking about my future and I'm considering my prospects and where am I going to end up in life and who am I going to be and things like that. I never felt settled in who I was and who I was going to be and what I was going to aspire to do. And so I remember what that looked like was me being pulled in polar opposite directions in terms of who I was. And so on the one hand, I was hanging out with my buddies in the hood and carrying a handgun and selling crack cocaine and you know, wearing the gangster clothes and all that to gain their acceptance. And then I remember I worked in an ice cream parlor after school because my parents were adamant about us having jobs and understanding the value of a hard-earned dollar and all of that. And all of my coworkers were white. And I desperately needed to be accepted by them because to me, they represented a status symbol of success because they lived in nice neighborhoods with manicured lawns and clean streets, and their dad worked at the building downtown. And so if I could gain their acceptance, then that would convey some level of respect and validation on me. And so I would hang out with them after work and I would bring a spare change of clothes, which was Tommy Hilfiger and Ralph Lauren Polo and all the preppy clothes, and change my vernacular and pronounce my INGs to be accepted amongst them. And so I'm literally navigating between two worlds, but not fully feeling accepted in either one because, I mean, that wasn't me. And so that was such a heavy burden to bear. And it was just much easier for me to drown out those negative, tough feelings with alcohol. So I remember I would literally come home from school and we would always find somebody outside of the corner store to, you know, pay them $1 or $2 to buy us some beer, some hard alcohol, whatever the case. And I would go into my room and lock my door and turn on some sad music and drink for the rest of the night. It's 16 years of age. And this escalated into me starting to drink before school. We would go to the store and steal Mad Dog 2020 and drink on the way to school. I got expelled for being drunk in class and had to go to an alternative school. And it was a treatment program within the school. And, you know, the funny thing is when I was there, though, I excelled because all my friends were back at our regular high school. And I'm in this alternative school by myself, essentially, doing treatment and things like that, treatment groups. And I got straight A's and some B's. And then as soon as I completed that program, then I was back in my high school and back with the old crew and skipping school and getting drunk and things like that. So in that culture, we were the antithesis of anything that was mainstream because I felt that mainstream society is not going to accept somebody like me, right? I'm black. I'm poor. My parent, you know, my dad works at the shipyard. And so if I was going to be accepted, it was going to have to be in this counterculture. So if mainstream society says you're going to wear your pants on your waist, I'm going to wear mine below my waist. If mainstream society says you're going to go to class and get good grades, I'm going to skip school and smoke weed and drink and do everything under the sun. And that was celebrated. I mean, I had gone to juvenile detention hall for 8 days. And when I got out and I went back to my high school, you would have thought that I was the biggest celebrity known to man. I was high-fived. I mean, for going to jail. And so that conveyed a level of respect and adulation. And I soaked it up because it meant that I was somebody. And at this point, I'm thinking, well, if this is all I'm ever going to be, then at least I have alcohol to comfort me through that. So I got a job. You know, I always never had an issue getting a job and holding a job and things like that. But as soon as I got off my job, I was drinking. So at 22 years of age, I moved out of my parents' house. I'm living with a woman in Vancouver, Washington, about a half hour away from Portland. I'm working at a job. I save up enough money. I buy my first car, and I'm going to community college in the evening because I'm taking college courses to become a nurse. And so externally, somebody will look at my life and say, he's doing pretty good. He's working at a job. He's got a nice car. He's independent, moved out of his parents' house. He's going to college. Good for him. But all the while, I am drinking daily and I am driving regularly while intoxicated. This persisted for about 2 years. And when I was 24 years old, it was New Year's Eve of 2003. I had traveled from my home in Vancouver, Washington, to a warehouse in Portland where I worked at the time. And we had gotten off work early because of the holiday. And I remember we're wrapping things up. And my boss had joked with us. He said, guys, go out and have a good time tonight, celebrate. But please do not let me wake up and see you on the front page. Of course, I laughed it off and I clocked out for the day. Nearly 20 years later, I've never, ever forgotten those words, nor will I ever. So I left work at about 11:30. I went straight to the liquor store where I bought a fifth of gin. I get to my parents' house. I hang out with my twin brother, and I drink the alcohol over the course of a couple hours. And then he and I had made plans for later that night to attend a friend's house party, a guy we had gone to high school with. And so after I drank that fifth of gin, it was customary for me to every single day go to the store and buy 4 24-ounce cans of beer. I did it like clockwork. So I went to the store, I bought my 4 24-ounce cans of beer. I drank those over the course of a few hours. It's about 8 o'clock. And my brother and I decided we would go to another friend's house in the meantime to hang out. We didn't want to get to the party too early. So we get to that friend's house. The three of us hang out. We drink a pint of hard liquor between us, feeling pretty good. It's about 11 o'clock. So we go to exit his apartment to go to the house party. And from the kitchen, here's warning number 2. His mother admonishes us and says, now y'all be careful tonight. You hear? And of course, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We're good. We're fine. So we get to the party. We see a bunch of old classmates. We drink more alcohol, of course. We bring in the new year. Everything is great. We exit the party at about 12:15 a.m. And the three of us get into my vehicle. I'll take my friend home without incident, get back onto the freeway to take my brother home. And at this point, all I'm thinking about is how utterly exhausted I am. And I needed to get him home because I still had another half hour or so to get to my house in Vancouver. And I didn't have to work the next day. So I knew I could just go home, go to sleep, and all was well. So on the freeway, I began to pick up my speed to about 80 miles an hour. And this makes my brother nervous, and he says, hey, man, you should slow down. The police are out, it being a holiday and all. And I thought, okay, well, that makes sense. So I went ahead and slowed down, and we exit the freeway about 10 minutes later. We're now driving in a residential area. And again, I just want to get him home. So I pick up my speed to about 60 miles an hour in a 30 zone. And this time my brother gets mad, and he says, man, slow down before we crash. And I snap back at him, calm down. I know what I'm doing. I've got this. I've done it 100 times. But just to keep him quiet and appease him, I went ahead and slowed down. So we continue to drive for about 10, 15 minutes. And I'm just about to get into the left-hand turning lane to drop him off at our parents' house. And then he suddenly realizes he's all out of cigarettes. So he says, hey, man, let's go up the street store and get some cigarettes. I'm all out. And in my mind, I'm thinking, great. Right, here's one more stop that I don't want to have to make. So we drive for a couple of blocks, and then about 2 blocks from that point, there's an intersection. And the little store we need to get to is just beyond the intersection. And I'm looking up at the light, and the light is yellow. And despite me being as intoxicated as I was, I still knew there was no way I was going to make this light. But it also didn't matter because in a split second, I made up my mind, I'm not going to wait. I'm going right through. So I immediately punched the gas, and I almost become tunnel vision where I don't see anything to the right or left of me. And within seconds, just shattering crash. And all I remember in that moment was everything seemed to go in slow motion as the airbag deploys and, feels like I'm being suffocated by a parachute, and my car comes to a slow winding halt. And I immediately looked to my right to see if my brother's okay. And he's coming to. And so we're moving. We're both alive. This is good. I'm somewhat relieved. Simultaneously, a pedestrian comes rushing up to the driver's side door frantically. Are you guys okay? Are you guys okay? Yeah, we're okay, I tell him. And I step out of my vehicle. And sadly, my first instinct was not to go check on the people I had just hit, but rather to assess the damage on my car because it was my status symbol of success. And I'm devastated because I'm now looking at my prized possession in a heap of crumpled metal. And then my brother gets my attention. And he starts to point across the street where that car had spun about, I don't know, 60 or 70 feet before it stopped. And he said, "Hey, man," he said, "I think I see somebody lying down on the pavement over there, and it doesn't look like they're moving." So instantly, I kind of snap out of it, and it starts to, resonate the magnitude and severity of what I had just done. But there's no time to process anything. Obviously, within seconds, license sirens are everywhere, rushing to the scene. So the policemen show up, the fire department is there, and they're talking to me, and they take my brother several feet away to talk to him. And about 2 or 3 minutes into that interview, that officer confirmed to me what I had intuitively known to be true, which was that person who was lying on the pavement had perished. And they informed me that another person was being driven to the trauma center just blocks away by ambulance. And so I'm placed under arrest. I'm put into the back of the cruiser, and we head for downtown for processing. And from the back seat, I am listening to the police radio because there's a lot of back and forth about the crash, of course. And about 10 minutes into that ride, I could hear it come over the police radio that, unbeknownst to me, there was another passenger who had been pronounced dead at the scene. So there was one survivor. So I'm now responsible for 2 deaths and another person who is in very bad shape who could lose his life, in the coming hours or days. Literally about 4 days later, I remember I was in my cell and I'm just minding my own business. And I noticed someone had slid the Oregonian newspaper underneath my cell door. So I picked this paper up, I begin to thumb through it, and I see my picture on the front page of one of the sections. And with each paragraph that I read that morning, for the first time since this had happened, my faceless victims became people. And these people had a story. And their story was that they were recovering addicts who had managed to turn their lives around and were now helping other people get clean and sober. They had like 16 years clean, and they were volunteers with VOA, Volunteers of America, and they would volunteer with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and they were celebrating at a clean and sober New Year's Eve party in Portland that night when they were returning home and struck and killed by a drunk driver. And so the columnist had talked about the irony. He called it a palpable irony that these people who had devoted their lives to helping people get clean and sober would have their lives cut short by a drunk driver. And then he said something at the end that changed everything for me. He said, perhaps the person they will have ended up helping the most is the man who's charged with killing them. And it was obviously such a profound statement. But I couldn't fully appreciate the value in what he had just said in that moment, because I'm still also very much aware that I'm going to go to prison for about 20 years. So there was no way I could see how this situation was supposed to help me, but I also knew I couldn't ignore what he said. So I kind of got back to my spiritual roots, and I started to pray about this statement, and I asked for revelation into how this statement and these words were supposed to apply to my life. And then it finally came to me, and I just realized that the only way this tragedy will not be in vain is if I carry on these people's legacies. If I literally make it my life's mission to do everything I possibly can to not just ensure that something like this never happens again, but to help anybody who is struggling in active addiction so that they don't continue to be of harm to themselves, to their families, to their communities. So in that moment, that's what I vowed to do. And so with that, I took a plea bargain for 17 and a half years, day for day. At my sentencing, I addressed the courtroom. There was, media and members from the Mothers Against Drunk Driving community were there. And I vowed to everybody there, this will be my life's work, that this will be my mission. And I said, I know it's not much consolation. It's not going to bring back your loved ones, but this is the least that I can do to honor what they stood for. And so I figured the easiest way to do this would be to get an education and become a substance abuse counselor. I didn't know what all was involved with that. I just knew I had to start somewhere. So when I got to state prison, at the time they were offering one community college course at a time that you could take, pay like $25. And so I said, okay, sign me up. So I started taking one community college course at a time. At the time I had a GED. And so I took these classes, one per term, and I'm doing well. I'm getting A's and learning a lot. 3 years into my sentence, I lose my father. And through his death, we were able to get his pension that he had worked his whole life for, along with some life insurance money. And so I was able to start to finance major university courses via distance education. I took courses, sociology and psychology, and I got a bachelor's in sociology in 2013. And then I went on to get a master's in psychology in 2016. My dad worked so hard all of our lives to provide for his family. There were 6 of us. My mom couldn't work because she was ill, so she took care of the home front, and Dad worked hard with his hands. And that man just turned 60 years old in December, and he just put in his retirement papers, and he passed away 3 weeks later in January. So he never even collected one retirement check. The best way that I could honor his hard work was to invest in myself and to invest in my future and to try to carry on the legacy of hard work and of being a service to other people. And so I'm honored to do it. And so as I'm taking these courses, I'm really starting to understand kind of the origins of my addiction and my negative behavioral patterns. And so I'm peeling back these layers, and I'm unraveling, kind of how I ended up here. And it's making a lot of sense. And so I've got all this knowledge, but that doesn't still get me where I ultimately want to be, which is I want to be a substance abuse counselor. And so I transferred to the one prison in Oregon that has a substance abuse treatment program in it. And I meet with the clinical director, and I tell him my goals, and I tell him, hey, I've got my master's degree. And I said, I want to become a counselor, but to do that, I know I need at least 1,000 clinical hours to get certified. So he said, well, yeah, no, you're right. And he said, but unfortunately, the Department of Corrections, we don't have a sanctioned program that will allow you to kind of get, those internship hours. He said, however, I haven't had many people come through here with this much education, and you've invested in yourself and your future. Long story short, a couple weeks later, he tells me that they were able to cut some red tape, and they're going to allow me to do this. But first, I had to go through the program as a participant to fully understand everything that they do in the program. It's 5 days a week, 3 hours a day. It's pretty intensive. I was thinking there wasn't a whole lot you were going to be able to teach me. I've got a master's degree, and I haven't used alcohol in 12 years. I was wrong, dead wrong, and I got proven that very quickly. And so that was a very eye-opening experience. And then I was able to graduate that program 7 months later, and now I'm starting to intern. So I'm now working with guys in the program one-on-one, and I'm starting to lead the group and things like that. And I'm getting all the clinical skills underneath me and logging the clinical hours. I got certified as a recovery mentor first in 2018. And then the following year, I got certified as a substance abuse counselor in Oregon. And meanwhile, I had also started to tell my story at a DUI victim impact panel within the prison. They would bring in people from the community who had lost a loved one to a drunk driver. And these people would tell these heartbreaking stories to a room of about 50 inmates sitting in a circle. And then one of us on the inside who had committed this crime would tell our story, being fully accountable and remorseful and showing contrition. There was so much cathartic healing. I mean, tears flowed, hugs were given. Some guys in that room were never going home, doing double serving sentences for double murder. It was just such a precious, rare moment in prison, because the minute you leave that room, all that goes away. You have to put on the stone face. You can't show emotion. And so that was my sanctuary. I got out of prison 2 years later in 2021, and I started to speak at DUI victim impact panels. Even though I've since moved to Pennsylvania, I do their panels twice a month remotely. So I speak to first-time DUI offenders and tell my story and implore them with everything in me to not end up like me. I work as a drug and alcohol counselor every day. I love my job. This is my mission. I will forever honor my victims' lives and the work that I do, because it's the least that I could do.
What tips would you have for somebody who's in a situation specifically where they're leaving prison and this time they're trying to make it right? This time they're trying to make it different.
You absolutely have to get connected. We cannot do recovery in a vacuum. You feel like if I just do things differently this time, then I should have this. Yes, you can do it differently. You should do it differently, but it has to involve other people, because other people are going to, be holding you accountable. That's what we need, right? The worst place we can find ourselves is by ourselves, because alcoholism and addiction love smart people who think they can outsmart the addiction, right? You cannot. And so first, get connected, whether you're meeting with a counselor, outpatient, once or twice a week, doing support groups, or at the very least, join an online group. There's no excuse to not connect with people. But then also to understand what your triggers are. There's people, places, and things, obviously, you want to avoid, but then there's also the internal triggers, right? Is it self-pity that can trip you up? Is it anger? So understanding what those internal triggers are, and then making sure that you don't sit with them by yourself in isolation. That is the worst place you can find yourself. It has to, your recovery has to be in community, not in isolation.
The last question I have for you is, what is sobriety?
So sobriety is just the absence of using the substance, but I'll say that recovery for me is a balanced approach to 4 critical aspects of my life, which is biologically, because I was in my addiction and not taking care of myself and putting chemicals in my body and not getting enough sleep and not exercising. I have to do the opposite of that today, which means I have to watch what I eat. I have to exercise. I have to go for walks. I have to engage in self-care. I have to get enough sleep. Psychologically, when I was in my addiction, I was not processing my emotions. I didn't even know what half of my emotions meant or where they came from. So today I make sure that I am very much in touch with my feelings, and then I talk to somebody about how I'm feeling. And then socially, when I was in my addiction, I was not hanging around the right people doing the right things. I didn't know what a healthy boundary was if it slapped me in the face. So today I make sure that I watch the company I keep, and I set healthy boundaries with people so they know where I stand, and keep myself safe. And then spiritually, when I was in my addiction, I was bankrupt. Today I have a very healthy spiritual program, if you will, and I'm very much in touch with my spiritual side, my spiritual self. I give deference to that, and I allow that to guide me in decision making, and just to make sense of some things in my life that, frankly, there's no way I could explain. And so I just make sure that I approach life in that balanced way as best I can to keep me firmly rooted in my recovery, which is a lifestyle.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, man. That was great. Thank you so much.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much, Kenny.
Kenny Hill with Recovery Hill. My intention here is to show the diversity of sobriety. How one finds themselves clawing from bottom is as nuanced as their journey to bottom. Their situation in recovery has the potential to be highly relatable to somebody who is watching. Therefore, I offer the interviewees to have total freedom to express whatever has worked for them, whatever has helped them sustain sobriety. That said, here at the end of the interview, I want to make a quick request so that it wasn't to take away from the interview itself. This request is that you like and share the video. You can subscribe if you want, that's up to you, but at least like and share it so that the content can get to as many people as possible. There is a great capacity and potential for the story you just watched to be able to help out somebody else to begin their story of recovery.